Hello there. Welcome in to a Tuesday edition of the show. Once again, or I guess still here in Vegas. Appreciate you tuning in, whether it's on 740 KVOR, Extra Sports 1300, or you're listening on the streaming apps of those two radio stations, which are both free to download. They are both free to use. You can listen to all sorts of shows and games too. You can listen to tonight's basketball game that I'm about to discuss. And they are both sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health, and well being for all. It will be a veritable cornucopia of sports topics coming your way over the course of the program. And I'd love to get your thoughts at 719 24/7 1313. Producer Ray Dominguez standing by to receive your communication. Now, let's start with the event of the evening, as Air Force is now one win away from making the NCAA tournament. As last night, they did it again, holding on for a 68-66 win over Boise State. And this remarkable, historic run, it just continues. And I have to ask the question going into the game tonight against Colorado State, is it just kind of meant to be? Because I watched the end of that basketball game last night, where Milani Perry, of all people, who was phenomenal again with 27 points, ironically misses a free throw that would have made it a 3-point game. And then obviously the only thing is, well, Boise State can tie and send it to overtime, but they can't win. She misses it. And Boise State has to drive the length of the floor. They're looking for the game tying two, which is a good idea. They missed the shot. Good defense by Air Force. And then it seems like after they rebounded the ball, either they were looking for a three or they were not aware of how much time was left on the clock. Either way, they didn't get another shot off. And Air Force hangs on. And look, those are the type of things that happens. We have these discussions, a 7-game series, it should really leave no doubt as to who the better team is, as long as we're not talking about an injury, right? But these one-off games, like we get in March in college basketball, it's not about, who'd win a 4 out of 7-game series. It's who's at their best on that particular night. And making those mistakes or losing your mind for just a moment kind of adds to that dynamic. That's the thing that, and I said this on the broadcast last night, Air Force made mistakes. They turned the ball over. They took a few bad shots. They missed free throws. But there were no, mental mistakes. Or very few. I'm not in the heads of the players, so maybe there was a wrong read or something like that. But the mistakes that were made were normal mistakes that you have through the game. Again, missed shots, turnovers, things like that. But and really over the 3 days, I can only count a couple of times where Air Force lost track of time or, failed to call a timeout when they needed to. They haven't made any hardly any of those kind of mistakes. This team is so locked in mentally. And especially last night, but as this tournament has gone on, it's benefited them because all of these games are close. All of these games come down to the wire, and one or two wasted possessions makes the difference between advancing and your season coming to an end. And it's just two things right now that you can absolutely, well, three things that you can absolutely bank on right now with this Air Force team. One, they are the more prepared team. And that's not to knock their opponents. I've been around this team enough, and Stacey McIntyre has talked about this, constantly referring to the game plan. And I was at shoot around today. This team, they don't leave any stone unturned. And look, you could argue that given the opposing forces that are going against them in college basketball, that they have, I mean, you have to find an edge somewhere. When you can't use the transfer portal, or you can't, open up, recruiting to everybody, right? It's a small sliver of high school athletes that are qualified to go to the Air Force Academy or that want to. So with all of these things going against them, they have to find an edge somewhere. And I think one of the edges that they have is how prepared they are. And I have to give a lot of credit to Stacey McIntyre and her staff, because they know the last 3 days exactly what this team needs to do in order to win. But the other half of that is the team has to execute, and that's the second thing that you have been able to bank on following this Air Force team. They're the most locked in. Again, not that the other team has their head in the clouds for 40 minutes. I mean, Boise State scared me anyway last night. The run they went on in the second quarter, and the fact that as the second half was going on, even when Air Force was playing at a higher level than they were in the second quarter, they weren't able to get past Boise State until, of course, they did. But they're just so locked in. And it's just remarkable to see. And there's something to be said for that in this kind of format. It's just like they still have their minds on, what schoolwork they have and all that kind of stuff. But they've been able to focus more on basketball over the last few days than they're ever able to. And that's not like they chose it. They're in for something bigger than even what they're playing for tonight, right? So all of them ask for it, all of them embrace it, and all of them are fine with the balance that they have to strike. But it just, this weekend has allowed them to just lock in at a level that they just simply cannot during the regular season. And that's not to say, that's why Air Force, ended up finishing where they are, because Air Force teams have won more games than this team did coming into the tournament. And you still have to, lock in, but it just speaks to how much this team has raised their game. And part of that is the mentality. So I don't think their opponents, as prepared as they are, and look, they faced 3 opponents, and tonight will be opponent number 4 that they have played twice before. There are no secrets between these two teams. Both of these teams tonight, CSU and Air Force, absolutely know what it takes to win. But whatever little edge that is there, Air Force has been able to find it. And then the team has been able to have almost a singular focus on that game plan, what they need to do. And then the third thing, I mentioned this on the show yesterday, they have the best player in this tournament. And Milani Perry does it again last night with 27 points, 60 over the last two nights in the biggest games in the history of Air Force women's basketball. In fact, right now, she has scored more points in this Mountain West tournament than any player has scored in any other tournament going on right now across America. So not only is Milani Perry playing the best basketball in the Mountain West, which is the most important thing, right? That's how Air Force finishes this thing off tonight, is if Milani Perry is once again the best player on the floor. But Milani Perry is playing the best basketball of any female college basketball player in America right now. That's real. That's what's going on right now. And to get a front row seat for this, well, really a second row seat, because I won't bother you with the details. I'm a little bit elevated from the court. And I spoke with, one of those assistants that does such a phenomenal job getting this team ready to play every night is Adam Wardenberg. He's the associate head coach for Air Force. Him and I had a conversation before this tournament started, and he told Milani Perry that she needed to be Kemba Walker. You remember that Big East tournament where Kemba Walker for UConn was just on another level, and for 5 days he helped carry UConn through one of the most brutal tournaments, the Big East tournament. I'll put that tournament above every other. The stage you're playing on at Madison Square Garden, the quality of that conference, and Kemba Walker, it's one of the college basketball memories that is just permanently seared into my brain, watching him over that week do what he did. But that's what Adam Wardenberg told Milani Perry she needed to be. And she's doing that. In fact, and this, my folder's away from me, but this was in the game notes from Aaron Ferguson, the outstanding SID for Air Force. Milani has the same amount of points right now as Kemba Walker did through this stage of the Big East tournament, which is crazy. And again, adding to the idea that it just, I don't know, it just feels like there's a lot of other things that you can't really quantify that's going on with this basketball team right now. And I got to imagine it's what anybody who's around any team that goes on, who is the people around that UConn team. But any one of these in stories, maybe not just like Air Force, because again, their situation is unique. They're a 9 seed, but also the institution that they are makes it a unique story going on right now in college basketball. But across the country, behind me, I have the West Coast Conference Championship on my TV. It's happening here in Vegas as well. All of these teams have to go through the same schedule, right? So there are stories of teams locking in and playing their best basketball at the absolute perfect time going on all across America. But again, this Air Force, it's just remarkable to witness in person. And if I may, credit to all these other teams across the country who are, and even Colorado State, got to talk about them because they, in and of themselves, are a remarkable story based on what they did last night in the face of a lot of adversity. But this it has to feel different. This is different. What's going on with this Air Force team? And they've already done multiple things that they have never done in their program's history. One more win, and they'll add another thing to that list, but it will be the thing. It will get Air Force women's basketball, a program that 10 years ago won one game. It will get them to the NCAA tournament. Air Force and Colorado State. How about women's college basketball in Colorado? CU is going to go to the tournament. And there will be another team from the state of Colorado getting an automatic bid tonight. Tip-off is at 7:30 on Extra Sports 1300. I'll have more on this game, and you'll hear from both Milani Perry and Stacey McIntyre as this program rolls along. For now, we'll step aside for a moment, come back and talk about the other basketball game we had our eyes on last night, that one taking place in Oklahoma. You're listening to 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. Think you have the luck of the Irish? Enter to win our pot full of cash, $5,000 cash. So this will be a St. Patty's Day you'll never forget. It's our Luck of the Irish giveaway. Head to extrasports1300.com or kvor.com to enter this national contest, which is sponsored locally by Bullseye Plumbing, Heating, and Air. No luck needed when Bullseye's on target. I'm ready to call it here. See if you agree with me. Nuggets aren't beating the Thunder this year. It's not happening. Not in a 7-game series. Maybe they find a way. I think they still have one more meeting with OKC. Maybe they'll get that one. They're not beating them in a 7-game series. It's not going to happen. And it's disappointing because you thought that the Nuggets did what was necessary this offseason to give themselves a better chance of beating OKC. Right? They completely remade their depth. And we thought that this was a deeper team. Actually, you know what? I'll stick with it. I still think that this team is the deepest, overall most talented Denver Nuggets team that I have ever seen. But they're not enough to beat OKC. And last night they lose 129 to 126. Shea hits a step back three. He was superb, as he tends to be. That's another thing that's over. He's winning the MVP. So we could just put that conversation away. I would still like Cade Cunningham and Wemby to have some consideration, but it's probably going to go to Shea. His numbers, his odds have skyrocketed. I just walked by a board earlier here in Vegas. He is a prohibitive favorite. He's winning the MVP. But that is secondary to what this season is about. And this season was about the Denver Nuggets winning a title. And in order to do that, they would have to beat the Thunder, and they are not capable. But I don't think this is about the Nuggets not being as talented as maybe we thought they were, or as deep as we thought they were. I mean, we could go into plus minus, and Jonas Valanciunas' plus minus has been abysmal over the last few weeks. Part of the reason why David Adelman doesn't play him, I would still try to play him, see if it improves, because the whole point was to get a backup five, but that's really neither here nor there. The reason why, above all others, that the Denver Nuggets are not going to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder this year, they don't have their edge against this team. It's just, it's a bad matchup for them, and they just, and it's not that they're missing an edge necessarily when it comes to just playing the Thunder. This team just doesn't have an edge. And when I say that, I'm talking about what transpires at the end of close basketball games. Killer instinct might be another way to put it. This team in crunch time just falls apart. They were up by 16 last night. And I'm inevitably expecting, of course, OKC is going to make a run. Of course, it's going to be close. You lead by 16 at one point in the game, you have to win that game. Point blank, period. I don't care who you're playing. OKC's too good to blow out. Fine. But you hang on some way, somehow. And this team, in the last few minutes of a game, just does not have it. Which is really bizarre, because They have a lot of the same players they won a championship with. But you almost wonder, and this is a credit to the team that won the title. Was it too easy for them? Were they just that much better than everyone else? Because I'm looking at a team with Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and Aaron Gordon, and I'm not singling any one player out. Okay, this is an across the board, top to bottom failure. You want to put more blame on one player than the next, that's fine. The bottom line is the Denver Nuggets just don't have it when the game is on the line. But maybe that's what it was. Maybe they were just so much better than everyone else when they won a title. And they're not so much better than everyone else. Even with what they have been able to bring in, you didn't think that they were infinitely better than OKC. They just tried to create their own version of what OKC had with their depth. They tried to get their own depth. But for a series that went 7 games, the thought was if the Nuggets are even just a little bit better than they were a year ago, they can beat OKC. But this team, they just don't have it late in the game. And how is that not going to hurt them when the playoffs roll around? Because if this team isn't treating these games like playoff games, then they got bigger problems. I'm assuming that they're treating this like playoff games because of the situation with the seeding and everything like that, and the fact that they're going to have to play OKC at some point, you would think. But this team in crunch time is not good. And there will be games in this postseason, whether it's OKC or anybody else, where the Nuggets are going to have to win in crunch time. I don't know if they can. Look, I still think that they're better than most of the teams. I still don't trust San Antonio with 0 playoff experience coming in and running the table. I think Houston is coming apart at the seams. So we're really just talking about OKC here, right? But they don't have it. And last night they were up by 16 in a game where they finally were the healthier team. That excuse is out the window, although Jamal Murray tried to use it last night. Here's Murray. Okay, but like the playoffs are coming up, right? So even if you hear what Jamal Murray says there and agree with him, how long does that take? Right? How long is that supposed to take? Because the playoffs get closer every single day. There aren't that many games left in the season. They are running out of they are out of time. So if you want to be optimistic about next year and say that the injuries, they just ran out of time to be able to figure everything out with everyone on the floor, fine. But we agree on my premise, which is it's not happening this year. It's just not. I think that there are more reasons for that than just the injuries and trying to work everyone back together. But even if you take that alone, it still means they're not beating OKC in a 7-game series. And then the question this offseason would be, do you run it? Do you try to run it back? Or who do you try? Who do you prioritize to bring back? It's not gonna happen, and here's another thing about OKC that does not it's not compatible with the way that the Denver Nuggets need to play. This back and forth stuff, like, and Dagnall last night, um, called his comments after the Lou Dort trip insensitive, so, eh, I kind of feel like maybe OKC is trying not to, be looked at as a dirty team, but then Lou Dort's awkward, like, throws his arm back and hits Nikola Jokic in the face. Like, Tiger's not going to change his stripes. Lou Dort is Lou Dort. So you may not be a dirty team, but you got a dirty player in Lou Dort. So you can either justify it or you could just own up to it and say, we're glad he's on our side. But this also, and before I get into that, here's David Adelman when asked about Lou Dort again, came kind of around of a screen and swung his arm back in a completely unnatural motion, much like the trip, and hits Jokic in the face. Here's David Adelman asked about it after. And look, that's another thing that's just not happening. It's not happening for David Adelman to win his war with the officials. That's not happening either. Because I don't know about you. I did not notice a big difference in the way yesterday's game was officiated. I still think that there's some inconsistency when it comes to the way that OKC is officiated on offense, or opponents of OKC are officiated on when they have the ball, and how they are officiated when they don't have the ball. But the fact of the matter is, they're just really good at what they do. You may not respect what they do, but they are really good at it. Because with all the attention about the officiating and Lou Dort and everything like that, I did not, in David Adelman's comments, I did not see a difference. So you have to say that in a 7-game series, these games are going to be officiated the same way. And that doesn't benefit Denver. They are just, OKC has taken what Minnesota was for the Denver Nuggets and have just amplified it. They're just better. But this team is just not. There are some teams, Detroit is being made in this image. OKC is this team. Minnesota is this team. Denver's not. They're just not the type of team that can, get down on that level and scrap and try to take, advantage of a referee looking the wrong way and all that kind of stuff. If you want to turn this into a referendum on the way OKC plays basketball, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. But the fact of the matter is, the Nuggets can't deal with it. And David Adelman's pleas have fallen on deaf ears. So you could slice this any number of different ways. If you want to put this on the Nuggets in their front office, that they didn't build the right kind of team, go for it. If you want to put this on David Adelman and say that part of the reason why the Nuggets don't have that edge especially late in games, is that he's too different from Michael Malone in that regard. Go for it. If you just want to give credit to OKC and say it's their time right now and it's no one else's time, then that's fine. But the bottom line is the Nuggets are not winning a title this year unless someone else does their bidding and knocks off Oklahoma City. So maybe root hard for San Antonio or something. We'll have to see how the seedings work out. The Nuggets might play OKC early. They're not getting through OKC. They were the healthier team last night. They were up by 16. Maybe Jamal Murray being in the game in that second half changes it, but I guess where I'm at on all of this is I am just tired of making excuses for the Denver Nuggets. Well, but what if this changes or would they get I'm done. They're not beating OKC. Time is up. It's over. They're not doing it. But play the series anyway and see what happens. It will help better identify, what Denver needs to do in the offseason, how they need to be different. But the worst thing is the revisionist history. Everyone thought that the Nuggets had exactly what they needed to push them over the top against OKC. Stop going back and saying they had a flaw in their building. No one thought that was a flaw. Everyone thought Cam Johnson was better for this team than Michael Porter. In some ways he is, and in some ways he isn't. They thought they had depth. Jonas Valanciunas was a gift from above. Finally a center. It just hasn't come together. The process may have been all right. They may have followed the right process to get David Adelman, the head coach, to acquire the depth, all of this kind of stuff. They may have done everything right. It's not going to work. And that happens sometimes in sports, as frustrating as that is. But I've seen all I need to see. 7-game series tomorrow or next week or next month. The Oklahoma City Thunder are going to beat the Denver Nuggets. 719-24-7. 1313. More Drive Time Sports after this on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. The Nuggets have run out of time. They are just not going to beat Oklahoma City in a 7-game series this year, and I will leave it to you to decide what you think the reason for that is, but that I speak the truth here. And I think David Adelman is going to bear the brunt of this. I'll say that. Brett, to that end, on the text line at 719-247-1313, the Denver Nuggets will have a different coach next year. If for any other reason than the guy has a face like he's not finished developing yet, he looks like every kid I beat up in high school rolled into one. He will likely get fired because he looks like Stewie from Family Guy. I don't think that will be the reason. But I think certainly you go through this, and I just keep coming back to, I think David Adelman is different than Michael Malone in the ways that the Nuggets needed him to be last year. And it's why I said I think they followed the right process here in naming him the head coach. But as he's gotten a full season now, and the dynamic has changed a little bit, and the honeymoon period is over. Now I think David Adelman is different from Michael Malone in ways that the Nuggets need him to be the same, if that makes sense. I think this team needs, and I'm not guaranteeing that this would work, but I think it'd be worth a try. They need a little one of those. They need Michael Malone rage timeouts. They need Michael Malone fiery press conferences. And they need Michael Malone's defensive mind. Right? David Adelman's an offensive guy. And the Denver Nuggets, I don't know if you noticed, still have the best offense in the league. Despite all the injuries, they're still the best offense in the league. Scored 126 points last night against one of the better defensive teams in the league. That's not the problem here. He was different in the right ways after the coaching change, but now he's different in the wrong ways. That's probably the better way to put it. At least the way this season has played out. I do not expect the Nuggets to fire David Adelman, if for no other reason than the Nuggets do very much value stability. And they just went through this kind of earth-shaking move at the end of last year. I don't think that Josh Kroenke is going to want to sign up for that again. And moving forward in David Adelman's career with the Denver Nuggets, maybe he'll get to the point where he's different than Michael Malone in the right ways again. Or maybe he'll learn to be more like Michael Malone in the ways that the Nuggets need him to be, while still keeping his identity in the things that the Nuggets respect and like about him and respond to. This is a first-year head coach. But I do think that David Adelman has to be a part of this conversation and maybe near the top of the list. But I got to raise my hand and say I thought it was the right guy. I thought it was the right decision. Although every time Stan Van Gundy is on the call for a Nuggets game, I go, man, this dude is still politicking to get that job. I think Stan Van Gundy loves the Nuggets more than David Adelman does. That dude is effusive in his praise and defense of the Denver Nuggets at all times. There's not a friendlier broadcaster to the Denver Nuggets than Stan Van Gundy. And just the reason why that matters is because that was obviously one of the names that were out there. But I don't know. Like I very much remember how things went in Orlando with Stan Van Gundy and that with the dynamic with Dwight Howard, and it's not all on him, but I just don't think that Stan Van Gundy was, pardon the basketball pun, a slam dunk hire. That it would be much better. But every day that goes by, I entertain the thought a little bit more. Now I'll tell you where it gets really dicey for the Denver Nuggets. What if they don't make it to an OKC series? What if they don't even make it there? Because I think that, well, first of all, the sooner people come to grips with the idea that there's no way the Nuggets are beating the Thunder this year in a 7-game series, the better off everyone will be. But I do think there will be some like, okay, well, it was just OKC, and they might go on to win the title again, and you go, well, they were the best team, and the Nuggets aren't quite the best team yet. But what if they get bounced by San Antonio? Think about what that would mean. I've discussed for the last few years, and this is also part of the frustration with what's going on with the Denver Nuggets right now. Why they refused, again, top to bottom organizationally, not singling any one person out. The entire organization thought that they could just lose quality players year over year while everyone else in the West was getting better and just be cool because they have Nikola Jokic. What happened in the 2 years after the Nuggets won a title was organizational malpractice. That team had everything they needed, obviously, to win a title and everything to win the title again. And then they lost a little bit. And then they lost a little bit more. They tried to get it back this year. But for whatever reason, it hasn't come together the way it needs to. But I think you really look back, not this year as the lost opportunity. How about right after the title as the lost opportunity? But what if Denver and I think the perfect encapsulation of that would be if the Nuggets lose to San Antonio, a team that they were infinitely better than like 5 minutes ago. And now San Antonio is here with Steph Castle and with Victor and with De'Aaron Fox and all of these moves and acquisitions they have made. And now San Antonio can beat the Nuggets in a 7-game series. Or how about if my thoughts that the Nuggets are kind of over the Minnesota thing? What if they're not? What if they lose again to Minnesota? Anybody other than OKC would be completely unacceptable. What if they fall to the play-in, Ray? Okay. We'll pick that up after the top of the hour. You're listening to 740 KVR and Extra Sports 1300. Welcome in. Glad to have you. Shouts to those of you watching the show on our social media platforms, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or X. The handles can either be at 740 KVOR, at Extra Sports 1300. Either way, both would be awesome. But if you got a station that you like following, you can follow that and watch the show on a daily basis. And you can comment while you're there, like very woke indeed on there are underscores in there. Commented on the live stream on Instagram. Spot on, Ryan. One of the best parts of the 2019 to 2023 Nuggets was how good they were in crunch time. It's the opposite now. And it is really bizarre that is the reason. But is this team different enough? Even with the core still there, the big three, if you will, of Murray, Gordon, and Jokic, is there too much different around them? And that's where I also go to David Adelman. Is he now different from Michael Malone in the wrong ways? I'm not saying I necessarily have the answer. I think I'm on the right track here. It's got to be something. Right? And producer Ray Dominguez was spot on when he said that this is akin to the Avalanche on the power play. It makes no sense. It makes zero sense, but yet it keeps happening and it's real. It's not fluky anymore. I saw a stat today that the Nuggets have lost more games in crunch time this year than any year in the Nikola Jokic era. It's not a small sample size. It's not a one-off. It's not a specific. I mean, it really hurts them against OKC, but it's hurt them against other teams. This is real. It's happening, but it's really difficult to explain why. And unfortunately, it's really tough to figure out for the Denver Nuggets and with the power play with the Colorado Avalanche, because they are admittedly brighter minds when it comes to basketball and hockey than I am, and they can't figure it out. David Adelman can't get this team to be better in crunch time, and Jared Bednar can't get his team to be better on the power play. It's perplexing to them. But it's real. It's part of who they are. And right now, the thing that I think is that the team may be able to overcome is the Avalanche and the power play. I don't know that the Nuggets in crunch time falling apart like they do is going to be something they can, move past. The majority of every game of the playoffs in the NHL happened 5-on-5. Right? Most of the time, the Avalanche are going to have 5 skaters and the other team will have 5 skaters. I don't feel confident in the Avalanche when they're on the power play, especially if they need that power play to, take the lead or make it a 1-goal game or whatever. I don't know that I will trust them in the playoffs to do that. But most of the game is played 5-on-5, and the Avalanche are the best at that. But with this Nazem Kadri acquisition, there's a little wrinkle in it, like, okay, maybe let's see how it goes. But I'm not. I wouldn't get my hopes up if you're an Avs fan. I think the power play is just going to be their Achilles heel, and who can exploit it. But most of the game's 5-on-5. Oh, but unfortunately for the Denver Nuggets, almost every game of the postseason comes down to crunch time, especially the later you get in the playoffs. So and you're not going to blow out OKC. So how are they going to beat OKC if they're not any good in crunch time? It's a rhetorical question. They're not going to be. Continue to take your thoughts on the Nuggets loss last night to the Thunder, 129, 126. But tonight, the Air Force Falcons have the chance to do something they've never done before, to culminate a week where they have done many things they have never done before. They have never won 2 games in a conference tournament. They have never knocked off the number 1 seed in the conference tournament. They have never advanced to a conference tournament final. None of these things have happened in Air Force women's basketball history, and there's one more tonight, which is win a conference title and clinch a spot in the NCAA tournament. And standing in their way are the Colorado State Rams. But before we get into that matchup, let's hear from Air Force after their 68-66 win over Boise State. Very similar to the San Diego State game. They had to hang on late, but they did. And that's one of the things that their head coach, Stacey McIntyre, is most proud of. Again, the mention of the game plan. This team, as good at, and Ryan Williams and his staff in Fort Collins are as good as it gets. It's a phenomenal staff up there and a great program with Colorado State women's basketball. But I will take Stacey McIntyre and her staff over everyone in the Mountain West. They are so well prepared. But again, the other half of that is that the team has to listen and internalize it and execute it, and they are doing that. I mentioned at the top of the show how locked in this team is. They have a singular focus right now, and they're 40 minutes away from achieving that goal that they have been focused on for the last week. They're going to win tonight. They're going to need another big performance from Milani Perry. 60 points over the last 2 games. No one in any conference tournament right now in America has put up more points than Milani Perry has so far in the Mountain West tournament. But there was something interesting she said last night that kind of stuck out to me. I'll give my thoughts after you hear the thing that stuck out to me. Here's Milani Perry after the game. That shows a change in tone from the last couple of days. And the shift in tone is a shift in the perspective of this Air Force team. After they beat San Diego State, they weren't just happy to be here anymore. They showed that last night. Right? When they beat San Diego State, I don't know what was going on in the deep recesses of their mind. On whether, how high that belief level was. It had to be quite high that they could beat San Diego State. But I think what Milani is speaking to is one, that Air Force is not just happy to have played last night or to have extended their stay in Vegas longer than any Air Force women's basketball team has. But beating San Diego State made that realization 100% sink in that now they can win this thing. You beat the best team. What else are you supposed to think other than you can win this entire tournament? Because over the course of a 20 game regular season, nobody was better than San Diego State, and Air Force beat them. So it was Milani kind of pushing against any idea that Air Force was just, happy to have done what they've done already. But it also kind of speaks to, I think, the way they were feeling about how their story was being viewed. Not that they're caught up necessarily on what's going on in the outside, although they are young women. They're, trust me, I've ridden on the bus, they're on their phones. But I think it's what's going on in this bubble that's out here in Vegas. Right? They're at shoot around, they pass by other teams, they're out there on the court. I think it's not necessarily what they're getting text or what they're seeing on social media. And I don't know. I don't know if Milani or somebody heard something or something was said last night in the Broncos game, but it just feels like a very pointed thing that Milani is saying there. That the disrespect. And I think that the disrespect, like I said this yesterday, what Air Force's win did was not just make Air Force believe that they could win this tournament. It made everyone else remaining in that tournament believe they could win. Right? They slayed the dragon. And now it was the teams that were left at that point, Fresno State, UNLV, CSU, Grand Canyon. They were all like, well, we can win it now. The team we went into it saying we got to go through them at some point. Can we beat them? They're gone now. And I think what maybe Air Force wanted and probably deserved was for people to kind of look at them as now the team to beat. And maybe they weren't really feeling that. And maybe it was some of what was said on the court or just the feeling they got, the vibe they got off of Boise State last night. Or maybe it was a text or a tweet or something on Instagram. I don't know. But it was clear because Milani Perry was not defiant in that way before last night. It just struck me, and I feel like there was, at the very least, they feel like maybe with beating San Diego State that people didn't look at them as the new team to beat and thought, well, Air Force had a fluky win over San Diego State. Well, that story's going to come to an end. Well, it didn't last night. But one thing about tonight's game, I'll tell you this much from the CSU side. There is no chance CSU goes into tonight's game taking Air Force lightly. If there was any thought that what Air Force did to San Diego State was fluky, what they did to Boise State last night should tell you that it wasn't. This is who they are right now. And Colorado State knows that now. If they didn't before, I don't know. I'm not with the Rams, so I don't know if they looked at Air Force as now the team they had to go through, or they looked at it like Air Force had a lucky win against San Diego State and they're the beneficiary because now they can win the tournament. But I know tonight that will not exist. CSU is going to be locked in, and their story is remarkable. Now, they're no stranger to this game. This is the 5th time Colorado State will play for a Mountain West title. But the Rams last night, and I was still there at the arena and saw this happen. It was just off to my right. Lexus Bargesser, the all-conference performer, Mount West newcomer of the year, highly touted transfer from Indiana. Their best player all season. Lands awkwardly. And the injury report or availability report will come out at the bottom of the hour. She's not going to play. Like, I can tell you that. I don't need to see the availability report. I think she suffered a serious knee injury last night. But she goes out of that game, I think it was like the second quarter, against UNLV, a team playing on their home floor, a team that is not far removed from winning this tournament 3 years in a row. And CSU, without their best player, beat UNLV. So both of these teams deserve a whole lot of credit for getting to where they are tonight. But what I wonder is there's so much adrenaline and there's so much adrenaline and there's also so little time. When your best player gets hurt and you're in the middle of a game, there's no time to like sit and really mull over what has just happened, stew about it. There's no time that you got to go on to the next play. But now over the last 24 hours, the reality has sunk in that CSU is probably going to be without their best player. And you wonder, one, how CSU compensates for that on the court, because she was the difference. You know, CSU won both games this year against Air Force, but the first one at Clune could have gone either way. Second game was all CSU, the one up at Moby Arena, and the difference was the way Lexus Bargesser played. She struggled to shoot the basketball at Clune Arena. She was terrific in Fort Collins. She was the difference that turned a game that was a coin flip into a decisive CSU win, and now she's not going to be available. So it's how they compensate for not having her in terms of who they look to offensively. But it's also how does that team now, with this reality having sunk in over the last 24 hours, I talked about how thinking about primarily or almost solely on basketball has really benefited Air Force. CSU has no distraction from the idea that they're going to be without their best player, and maybe they use it as a rallying cry. But it's all I'm saying, it's going to be a very different dynamic for them tonight without Lexus Bargesser than it was losing her in the middle of last night's game. But CSU showed they're not a one-person team. Just like Air Force, we talk about Milani Perry a lot, and for good reason. She's not doing it alone. Emily Adams was terrific the first 2 games of the tournament. I think Keely O'Halloran has been one of the more underappreciated Air Force players. Jada McNabb, the reigning defensive player of the year in the Mount West, has been good. It's been a team effort. And CSU showed like, yeah, we got a lot of good players too. They do. It's not going to be a walkover for Air Force by any stretch of the imagination. but it is a different dynamic. And I would imagine it's a little bit more difficult on the CSU side to deal with that, given that so much time has passed and you're not in the moment anymore. Lot of interesting storylines going into tonight. Most important one is, how good are the hoops in Colorado right now? CU going to the NCAA tournament, and they'll be joined by either Colorado State or Air Force. 7:30 Mountain Time is the tip-off from out here in Vegas. You can hear the game on Extra Sports 1300. Back to the Nuggets conversation after this on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. Think you have the luck of the Irish? Enter to win our pot full of cash. So this will be a St. Patty's Day you'll never forget with $5,000 and our luck of the Irish giveaway. Just head to extrasports1300.com or kvor.com to enter this national contest sponsored locally by Bullseye Plumbing, Heating and Air. No luck needed when Bullseye's on target. This just coming down from Colorado College, they have extended uh, their hockey coach Chris Mayotte to a 5-year extension. Extended him to an extension, signed him to an extension, extended his contract for another 5 years. And Colorado College, I think, last year was, I think, a peak for that version of the team that Chris Mayotte helped build. They had so much turnover this year. They were a very young team. Yes, they still had Caden and Barrico and some key pieces that made you think that maybe they could do more than what they ended up doing this year. But I think in reality, this was a rebuilding year. And what Leslie Irvine, the director of athletics there at Colorado College, I think is looking at is this is the guy, he built it up before. This was year one of the next phase of Colorado College hockey. And there's no one I trust more to build this thing back up than Chris Mayotte. So I don't know anybody who would push back against the idea of Chris Mayotte staying in Colorado College for the foreseeable future. But it is official 5-year extension for Chris Mayotte. Let's get to a couple of your tech. Well, first, Ray, continuing the Nuggets conversation, you asked me a question at the end of the last hour because I threw out the scenario of I think people will come to grips with the idea that the Nuggets cannot beat OKC, and hopefully I will have played a part in pushing them in that direction. But now my doomsday scenario is what if it's not the Thunder who ultimately end the Nuggets season? What if it's someone else and now there's another team that the Nuggets have to figure out a way to be better than moving forward, and how that might make things even worse? But you threw out another, or you were asking a question about another playoff scenario. What was it? And how far are they up just for my 2 games up? And what, and if they bow out in the play-in, then that's going to be the worst case scenarios, for sure. But you're asking, do I think that the Nuggets will be able to get out of it? Ye- Given, right? I'm just trying to remember who all else is in the play-in. Yes, yeah, yes, I do. That pause was not intended for dramatic effect or because I was actually thinking about it. Yes, I do think that the Denver Nuggets, and I'm still at the place where I think that the Nuggets season only is ended at the hands of Oklahoma City. I'm still there. Now I can go down further, but I'm still there. But ultimately, there's scenarios that are worse than losing to OKC, right? Going to the play and getting bounced in the play and losing to the Spurs, all that kind of stuff. But in the end, it's a, the thing is they didn't win, and that was what this year was about. This is a championship or bust year for the Denver Nuggets. So who they lose to is secondary to the fact that they lost. But go ahead. Um, I don't think that you want that. I don't think that you want that because there's and look, it's a weird world that you are in, and right now, 3 of the teams that we discuss on a daily basis are all in this window. The Avalanche, the Broncos, and the Nuggets right now, it is about at least playing for a championship. The next season that happens, Avalanche and the Nuggets are already here. Broncos will be in the fall. All 3 of those teams, anything less than representing their conference in their championship round is a failure. It is below expectation if you want to put it nicely. So with that, it kind of tends to distort the reality because the reality is, and again, I still think that it's OKC that ultimately ends the Nuggets season. I don't want to get carried away to think that the Denver Nuggets need drastic moves. Do you? Do you think they need to do you think something drastic this offseason? Right. But that would be a huge move given firing the coach is a big move, but firing him the year after, I mean, this is like Gerard Mayo taking over for Bill Belichick. Like they thought he was the right guy in 1 year. They're like, no, he's not, and they fire him. Well, I think to your point, it's the only drastic move that realistically um, they could make. I would be you can't, and I'll get into this with the Broncos here momentarily, but you can't say with this team if they lose to OKC, well, just run it back. Like I think that's the wrong perspective. They're going to have to make a change or two, but I think that's all they need. I think ultimately, when we get the full picture of this season, I think we will look at it and say, yes, once again, even with all the moves, they weren't better than OKC, but they don't need a page run one rewrite. They don't need to go back to the drawing board. It is, and look, they're going to, this will kind of help them out. They're going to lose guys anyway, right? They have no control. We can debate Cam Johnson, Peyton Watson till the cows come home. But they're not keeping Hardaway and Valanciunas both. They're going to have to make some additions or replace some players, and I feel like therein lies the opportunity for the Denver Nuggets to make themselves better in the ways they need to be better in order to be OKC. So I think a lot of this is going to be natural, just because the Nuggets, with where they're at financially, are not going to be able to just run it back. And I think that's for the best because if they lose to Oklahoma City, then they can't run it back. You can't. How can you justify that? This is not. We can talk about the young players that they have. This is not a young team. These guys are who they are. If you don't like what Jonas Valanciunas is bringing you right now, he's not going to get better. So I don't, and it's a good question. I do trust the Denver Nuggets to extricate themselves from the play-in if it were to come to that. And I am still of the mind that if in a world where it's not OKC, it's Denver in the West. But they're going to have to change things up slightly. And if you really don't, what we were discussing, if you really don't believe in David Adelman, they need to lose in the play-in. it needs to be that kind of because getting to OKC and losing in another 6 or 7 game series is not going to stir Josh Kroenke into making a coaching change. So if you are, and I'm not saying this to you necessarily, Ray, I'm just saying it to anybody who is completely out on David Adelman, then hope is a weird word to use. The only way that's going to happen is if the Denver Nuggets fall to the play-in and they don't even make the real playoffs. So do with that information what you will if you are anti-David Adelman, but that's what it would take. I don't think this team needs sweeping changes. I think they did the right things. I think it's not panning out, and that happens. And when that happens, here's the true mark of a good organization, and here's another big test for that two-headed front office that they have. What are you going to do about it? What are you going, because this was one thing that Calvin Booth, with all the negative around him, here's one thing Calvin Booth did right. He added a couple of players that the Denver Nuggets absolutely needed after they lost in the Western Conference Final in the bubble. He added players that they needed to help push them over the finish line, and Tenzer and Wallace are going to have to look at this roster and decide what it is this team needs and go and get it. Because next year's not going to be any different. Next year's going to be championship or bust. Every year with Jokic now is championship or bust. And they're on the verge of busting this season. This text coming in from Tom said, I did not think Adelman was the right hire, but not here to say I was right. Just wish you were right. Bummer a year with this good of a team is wasted, but I do have a little more faith in a healthy Nuggets team than you do. And then adds, are you believing in the Celtics yet? Let me start with the last one first. Not only am I believing, like evolving into believing, I believed. I've been with the Boston Celtics. Now, I will bring this up. I don't know why I need to, because I don't think that I am self-important or anything like that, but I will bring up I had the Chiefs and the Packers in the Super Bowl, so I do get some wrong, but I had the Thunder playing the Celtics in the NBA Finals this year. I had that. So I'm not believing. I believed. I have been believing. Present participle. I haven't been out on the Boston Celtics 1 minute of this season. No. No. I mean, I would still look to the West. I'm conceding that Shea's going to be the MVP. I don't know that. And when I said this earlier that he's going to win the MVP, that was not me saying necessarily that he deserves it. I'm just saying that's where it's going. And I'd still give a look to Wemby. And I think what everyone's waiting for is just for him to miss enough games that he doesn't qualify. Like, that's what I think, because how could Wemby not be in the conversation? We're talking about San Antonio being able to knock off OKC and dominating the season series with OKC, and Victor Wembanyama is not the most valuable player. So I think everyone's just waiting for him to miss enough games, and he's close enough that he probably will, but he hasn't yet. So I think he needs to be in the conversation, and your guy, Cade Cunningham, I still think needs to be in the conversation. I wouldn't close the book on the MVP race. I'm just saying the book is closed. I didn't close it. Other people did. And Shea's gonna win it. I mean, that was look, let's call it what it is here and give a little bit of credit where credit's due. That was a big time shot, and that was a huge game for Shea last night on a primetime stage. With all the attention going into that game because of what happened 10 days ago. I mean, Shea balled out. And so I just say let's wait till the end before we make our decisions. But that was a massive performance from Shea on a really big stage. And if Jokic Well, I'll just say with the numbers Jokic put up last night, if the Denver Nuggets won, guess who be talking we'd be talking about as the MVP frontrunner? Jokic. Right. Mhm. 719-24/7, 1313. Come back. I want to get to a couple of texts regarding the Denver Broncos, and they're timely because some things have been made official in terms of the ins and outs of the Denver Broncos. We'll get to that next on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. You ever wake up after a full night's sleep, like you go to bed when you're supposed to, something that I don't normally do, but you do the right things. You get up in the morning and your body's like, nope, not going to happen today. Not going to cooperate. Not going to have the energy that I need. That may not just be you getting older. It may be that your testosterone levels are tapping out. That's why you need low T center. They specialize in this stuff. No one size fits all mystery doses. They use pharmaceutical grade testosterone, the highest quality on the market, and they customize it to your body. And yes, it's covered by most insurance, so you're not blowing your whole paycheck just to feel like yourself again. And right now, they're offering a free men's T test, zero risk, zero commitment, just answers. And if you've been curious about peptides for energy, recovery, sleep, weight loss, whatever it might be, they've got discounts on select peptides and GLP-1s while supplies last. So if climbing a flight of stairs feels like you're the guy that was running that marathon and got caught in the last like 10 yards the other day, you see that? It's time for a change. Head to lowtcenter.com and book your free test today. That's lowtcenter.com. So here's my question. Well, let me get to a couple of texts here that will kind of tee me up on this. So Broncos have made a few things official. Justin Strnad re-signed. Alex Singleton re-signed. Dre Greenlaw released. PJ Locke, they let him walk, and J.K. Dobbins. I haven't seen anything, a picture of J.K. Dobbins signing his contract, but that's also, it's a lot of news about Broncos players from this year's team with the Denver Broncos. Not a lot of Broncos are bringing in. It's either bringing back or not bringing back. That is the conversation right now around the Denver Broncos. This text came in. Do the Broncos not realize how incredibly lucky they were to win 14 games? They honestly believe they can just repeat that. Not likely. But then there's this side of the conversation. I'm perfectly fine with Broncos not overpaying in free agency. Chiefs and Raiders will have to live with the choices that they made. I don't think. Now, it's fine that you're okay with what the Broncos did, or more accurately, did not do yesterday when legal tampering started. And by the way, it kind of feels like free agency is now over. By the way, Romeo Doubs, there's another Broncos target. He went to the other team that is constantly rumored to be landing difference makers and never do, the New England Patriots. They signed Romeo Doubs. So there's one more potential add to the wide receiver room that the Broncos are not getting. So that's your choice if you want to be on board with the Broncos not overpaying. And you could certainly say that, especially in the case of Tyler Linderbaum, that the Raiders overpaid. They'll admit they overpaid. I mean, not publicly, but they'll admit it. They were desperate to get him in. And maybe you could say that the Chiefs overpaid for Kenneth Walker. I don't think either team's going to really regret those signings. Are those signings going to result in what they hope it will? That's the question. But regret? The Chiefs are going to regret signing Kenneth Walker. The Raiders are going to regret signing Tyler Linderbaum. You didn't use the word regret, but that's what you're insinuating. They're not going to regret those. The question is, does it make them better? And I'll just tell you, with the Raiders, even with Linderbaum, they're still a ways away from being any good. And I don't think this is about making themselves good right now. This is about making sure that Fernando Mendoza is good when he needs to be, and the Raiders can compete in the future. And with the Kansas City Chiefs, I'll at least agree with your, second your emotion to one extent. Kenneth Walker, last time I checked, can't guard receivers. And the Chiefs don't have any corners. So I'm not saying that Kenneth Walker makes the difference and puts the Chiefs back in the Super Bowl, because they got some holes to fill still. But they're not going to regret signing Kenneth Walker. That's going to work. It's just that they got the other side of the football they need to worry about. But here's the thing. And it's a very simple question that I will pose to the Denver Broncos and any team in any sport. If you simply bring back your own players from a team that did not accomplish its ultimate goal, very simple question. How are you going to be better? Because forget the Broncos, the bottom falling out, and the assertion from the texter that they got lucky, all that kind of stuff. Let's just say that in the most optimistic view is that by bringing back all of these players, the Broncos will be as good as they were last year. Wouldn't you agree with me that in order for the Broncos to be better than they were a year ago, they would need to bring in better players? That the players that they are bringing back were not maybe good enough, or maybe there are better players out there. What this clearly is right now with the Denver Broncos is that they feel with every fiber of their being, not just that if Bo Nix plays in the AFC Championship, that they win that game. I think they truly believe they would have won the Super Bowl. That has to be the explanation. And I can get on board with the idea that they win that AFC Championship game. They're not beating Seattle. But they must believe that they would have, or else they would be looking for some outside help to make themselves better. Coming up next, my thoughts on the continuation of a remarkable run for Air Force women's basketball.